Hello, welcome everyone. Let's get started with our webinar for today. This is MHPN's monthly webinar. My name is Brenda Rigdon. I'm filling in for Shahan Bao-Smith, our usual host, and I will be your moderator for today. We are very excited to have Timothy Scarlett from Michigan Technological University with us to talk about energy technology and industrial heritage, opportunities for adaptive reuse, and place-based design thinking. So before we turn everything over to Tim, let's go through some Zoom items. If you have any questions, please type them into the Q&A box as you think of them. All the questions will be answered at the end of the presentation. If you have any technical difficulties, please also type your problem into the Q&A box. We will be monitoring that. The chat boxes will be used to share links and resources discussed during the webinar, and I'm in the process of uploading the various resources that Tim has shared with us right now. Both the Q&A and the chat boxes are at the bottom of the screen down here. And if you don't see them, please wiggle your mouse and that will sometimes make it come up. Or that should make it come up. Okay, if this is your first time attending our webinar, we are the Michigan Historic Preservation Network. We support the sustainability and economic viability of Michigan's historic places through advocacy, education, and direct action. We cannot do the work that we do without our members and volunteers. If you are not a member yet, please consider joining us at www.mhpn.org. And a quick announcement. We are now accepting nominations for Michigan Historic Preservation Network 2026 Preservation Awards. The deadline is Monday, February 9th, 2026. Please check our website for details. If you are seeking AICP continuing education credits, you will need to log in to get your credits online after this event, and that link will also be in the chat. This webinar is supported in part by an award from the Michigan Arts and Culture Council and National Endowment for the Arts. We want to say a big thank you for our sponsors who make these things possible. And now, it is my great pleasure to introduce our speaker, Timothy Scarlett. Tim is an MHPN board member, and he is an associate professor at Michigan Technological University. Tim's bio is available on our website, and we will be sharing the link to that page in the chat. With that, I will turn it over to our speaker. And here we go.
There we go. Thank you very much, Brenda. And I'm very grateful to you and Shahan for the invitation to speak with our colleagues, and to all the people in the webinar who are members of the MHPN. Thank you for your membership and supporting our community. And hopefully there'll be some folks joining us who may be from outside that network who would think about or consider joining us.
Sorry, Tim. I kind of messed up. I forgot to stop my share, so now you're up. I'm sorry,
okay.
apologize.
Are you seeing my slide?
Yes, I was just checking, like, yeah, we're seeing the slide.
Great.
Sorry, folks. This is my first rodeo on this.
Yeah, you're doing fine. I appreciate it. Brenda agreed to stand in for Shahan at the last moment because of a conflict. So, but anyway.
No problem.
It's funny to joke with an industrial archaeologist about technical problems. Anyway, so I want everyone to understand at the beginning, I'm going to go through a bunch of stuff really quickly with the hopes that we'll have a conversation at the end. And I'm supplying you with links and resources, including we'll send around these slides that you'll be able to use for your own considerations. Because really, what I hope to do with this seminar is explain something that's consumed a lot of my time as an archaeologist who suddenly finds himself in the center of energy development discussions in really interesting ways. And for many of you, what this translates to is a business opportunity for you to do what you really, really want to do, which is to change preservation from a reactive activity to a proactive, inclusive activity in the regions where you work. So our learning objectives for today, we're going to summarize energy technologies that are available out there in the in the marketplace. We're going to explain how how heritage professionals of all types can help communities shape future energy development as part of redevelopment or remediation projects, with an emphasis on underground assets. And then to discuss how preservation laws, policies, and incentives and practices can be refocused as processes to facilitate community engaged design. And that, I hope, will be a discussion, and we'll identify some ways that agencies and companies can build collaborations with universities, colleges, or schools and other organizations to facilitate projects. So, for most of you who are in industry in one capacity or another, I don't need to explain that the energy infrastructure around the world is being transformed. This is more than a generational change. It is a century-driven shift in changing the energy infrastructure. In the United States alone, we're looking at $1.5 trillion expected to be invested in the next 5 years. That's in generation, in transmission, in storage, and in consumption also. Although most of those don't think about the consumption when they're talking about these levels of investment, because they're talking about energy companies making these investments. So for our first part, what I want to do is summarize various energy technologies for you, and we're going to focus on storage, and I will explain why. But to be sure everyone understands the transition that's happening, whether you are a fan of it because it involves a transition away from carbon-based to non-carbon-based generation, or centralized generation to distributed and irregular generation of renewable technologies, or whatever your interests are, whether you're interested in just the fact that market forces are driving solar adoption now as the leading and most rapidly growing energy source in the world. Storage will be absolutely essential in this, and it doesn't matter if you're building nuclear power plants or if you're building solar farms. Storage will be the critical asset. And everybody in industry knows this, and they've known this for many years, and they've been sort of kicking the can down the road on solving this problem for a long time, because there's an existing technology system for solving this energy storage problem, that of pumped hydropower storage, pumped hydro storage, where you just create a gravity battery that you buy energy when the energy is cheap overnight, you pump water uphill, then when energy becomes expensive, you run the water back downhill through the turbines, the reversible turbines, you generate power and you sell it. Where your energy is at a loss, your energy generation is at a loss, but you're making money because you're buying low and selling high. In the hydropower world, we have not built any new pump storage or any real serious hydropower projects in many, many, many years, because the ecological impacts, the social impacts are so significant from large hydropower projects we'll talk about later. Professionals have been finding ways now, turning attention to closed loop hydropower storage systems as a mature technology system that'll solve all these problems, update and modernize the energy grid, but do it with a minimal environmental impact, not zero, but minimal. I've been helping on a committee to review for the Low Impact Hydropower Institute for the Department of Energy, to talk about how this could be resolved, or how this can contribute. But I want you to understand that this is much bigger than this. And it is an area where preservation plays a critical role. This example that I put out here from historic England serves as a case in point, where the Cromford Mills, just this past 2 years, refit what is a pioneering, world significant hydropower system in a textile mill that is arguably the birthplace of the Industrial Revolution. This is a World Heritage listed site. They updated that old water power system as a micro hydro system to generate electricity to provide power to the World Heritage Site as well as its surrounding community. It was a small project, but this kind of adaptive reuse is something we're seeing happening around the world as people are thinking about ways where heritage assets can be repurposed in energy. And by case in point, this is an example of energy storage here in Michigan. Those of you who are in our area are familiar with Ludington, the story of the Ludington plant. It is built above Lake Michigan on the sand dunes up above, and it has about 111 meters of head with 6 turbines. It was built beginning in the 1960s to balance power generation from nuclear power plants around the bottom of Lake Michigan. And it is just not too long ago passed through its 50th anniversary. They just refit all these turbines, and it's going to continue to operate for at least another 50 years, balancing the electrical grid in that region. But this is the kind of asset we haven't built in generations that we desperately need. But what I want again to explain is that the technologies have been evolving while we have not been building any of these. So you'll get this web sheet that is just a dynamically updating web sheet of companies operating in energy storage systems in the underground environment or adjacent to the underground environment. There are things that are underground in abandoned mines or that are underground in new construction but could be repurposed into mines, or in underwater environments that could be deployed in underground flooded mines. And what I hope you'll see in looking through these are just the diversity of different kinds of projects that are out there. And also that these are not incompatible with other kinds of land use, because it's already been done one time in the world, where in this case in Wales, a slate mine, a quarry, was adaptively reused for pumped storage hydropower. And this Dinmorig power station now is a major asset on the electrical grid in Wales. It is situated within a major wilderness park and a major World Heritage listed historic landscape with national museums, so that it is harmonious within this larger ecosystem of both environmental and cultural heritage sites. These projects are potential ways to adaptively reuse industrial infrastructure that are productive and that are heritage enhancing strategies depending upon design. In the list are a bunch of project examples that go along with these companies that you can look at. And just to give you some examples, here in the United States is the Lewis Ridge project in Kentucky. This is an effort to adaptively reuse during the reclamation process for a former coal mine, where they're going to use the landscape to build 2 surface ponds as part of that reclamation process, where they can pump water up and down. It's all on the surface, but it is an adaptive reuse of mining land through the mitigation process. Here in Australia, the Kidston Pumped Storage Hydro Project is in an old gold mine. In this case, it is reusing the surface pits as well as some of the underground, and some of the mine infrastructure is supporting this adaptive reuse as an energy storage asset for grid scale energy storage. But those are pumped hydro, but there are other technologies that are increasingly less mature, but yet potentially very adaptable and will have tremendous impact. Hydrostore is a Canadian company that does advanced compressed air systems. This is an example of the project in the Willow Rock Energy Storage Center actually that one is, I think, also in Australia. There's also one, or this one may be California, excuse me. This is another project where an underground technology to compress air rather than lifting and lowering water. They're moving water and compressing air to turn turbines. But another nearly mature or mature technology system that's being built out around the world as a grid scale energy storage system. Then there are other technologies that I mentioned. This is Re-Energize, a company from the United Kingdom working in the EU, and they're doing what they call high density hydro, where instead of using water, they're using a high density fluid, and that manufactured fluid is contained within closed tanks or reservoirs. And because it's a high density fluid, higher than water, it is has a greater energy density for the turbines. So you can either have a third less of the head or a third less volume of fluid and still get the same amount of energy as traditional pumped hydro. And it is essentially pumped hydro just with this fluid. So it is, I consider, a mature technology, even though it's comparatively new, coming out on the marketplace. And then there are others that are much less mature, but yet are in the process of building or have just completed demonstration plants and are now ramping up to be built out as infrastructure. Segula Energy has this underwater compressed air storage system, and it is another example. It's something that could be deployed in an abandoned mine that is flooded without having to drain the mine, and you could install this kind of a system within that environment. QuidNet has a gravity-based system, geomechanical, so to speak, and they have their demonstration project that is coming online. It is essentially raising and lowering blocks, which can be done in a tower. There are several companies doing this kind of thing. Or you could put it into an old abandoned mine shaft or a quarry, something like that. Cavern Energy Storage uses this is a Texas company. They use a version of compressed air in salt domes. So it's kind of somewhat limited in play space, but yet appropriate in places where there are former salt mines, like underneath Detroit, for example. Now, some states have been stepping in after changes in the Department of Energy with the shifting political priorities in the energy space. Some states have been stepping in to increase the harmonization of the way in which their abandoned mine lands programs operate, and their energy infrastructure is being developed. In part, the major challenge here is that the mining people and the energy people don't talk to each other, because the mining company's job is to mine and the energy company's job is to make or generate or transmit or sell energy, right? So they're not a natural alliance together, but everyone has recognized the efficiency of using land reclamation projects, which are already needed to build out energy infrastructure through generation and storage in a way that then minimizes impacts on green space. So as all of these things are evolving, some states are out in front of this curve because they're trying to attract that $1.5 trillion investments. Some states are not. And that varies state by state, but you'll see some examples of how you'll be able to help improve this on behalf of your stakeholders or your clients. I see there are some questions coming in, so I'll be returning to some of those in a few moments. There are a lot of questions about these technologies. They're all very different, and so they can all be. This is the interesting point, right? I am an advocate of thinking about co-locating these things because, from a heritage perspective, adaptive reuse of a formal industrial asset for industrial purposes is the highest and best adaptive reuse, very broadly speaking, right? Many of these mines are built already on the infrastructure of energy transmission, for example, so they don't require extensive new transmission infrastructure. They don't require cutting up green space or precious sites that will be areas of social conflict. But there are so many questions that you could ask about this that really, if you're a company that has a technical solution, what they're all looking for right now is the low-hanging fruit, Where are the easiest areas that I can do my technology system and make the most money for the least risk? Meanwhile, you have all of these post-mining communities and you have all of these economic development agencies, and they are looking at solving their own problems. How can we get economic development with the least risk for the quickest return? Which may involve converting green space, farm fields or forest or other green space, into industrial space for storage. This is an essential problem that needs to be addressed. And if we allow for the easiest solution, not the most profitable, but the easiest solution, it will almost always be developed in isolation among these different groups. So can I explain then how you as a CRM or heritage or preservation professional can fit into this system? I like to describe it. I've taken this old concept from an educational program I used to work for a long time ago, the idea of optimal match. Instead of letting the energy companies think just as energy companies, instead of letting the economic development people think about economic development, instead of the mine reclamation people thinking about mine reclamation, or the energy companies thinking about energy, what if you could operationalize yourself to be the interface between figuring out what is the ideal energy storage technology for this environment in this post-industrial landscape, be it an underground mine or a quarry or some sort of heavily disturbed landscape? How can you help mining companies or energy companies? How can you help post-mining communities? How can you help regulators and legislators? And these are all different areas that we might talk about more as you are interested. Primarily because these people, you know better than anyone else, these people can be your clients. The people in City Hall in the post-mining communities who are dealing with all the challenges that they're dealing with. You all understand the interconnections between economic development, landscape preservation, new development versus infill. Like, you get it. And so you're uniquely situated to help as the interface between these companies. Plus, a lot of your skills in your company are directly applicable. This is an opportunity to stop being reactionary and instead be in the planning room, helping with brainstorming. What kind of underground assets do we have? What is their geology? What is their size? How much money did they earn? What environmental implications were there to these mines operating? What do the residents of these communities need? How do they relate to these old mining sites? Within any of these contexts, do any systems make sense that we could see harmonious co-development? For example, we generally don't think about underground cultural resources as we're doing archaeology, for example. The underground gets kind of written off because it's too dangerous to get to for survey. Yet these are underground cultural landscapes. These are footprints from the 19-teens of the last set of miners to walk through this particular mine added at the Adventure Mine here in the Keweenaw that was drained a few years ago for consideration for tourism development and has since been allowed to refill with water. And these are lived landscapes. This is one of my favorite examples of artwork by miners who are using the carbon black from their headlamps to draw on the walls. But you know that these sense of place relationships as cultural heritage professionals are intimately tied with industrial workplaces in as much as anything else, and not just historically, but as heritage landscapes, right? People come to the Quincy mine, this example, to take their wedding photos. Like, this is where people bring guests and visitors to learn about the history of their community. This is where generations bring back their young children from the Copper Country diaspora, for example, to where they bring them back to visit and learn about the work that their grandparents did, for example, right? So you are uniquely situated to help these things in thinking about what is a harmonious way that any of these technology systems might be applied in this particular situation to meet the needs of these people, right? And you understand, I hope, that brownfields are not wastelands. And just because you're working in a brownfield doesn't mean that all the other cultural concerns about landscape use and decision-making and heritage choices, that those are all go away, because people have complex relationships with post-industrial landscapes in mining communities or extractive communities the same way they do in any other community. What we have found is that we can convert these opportunities into community-led or community partnerships where we can connect communities, municipal leaders with energy companies or cooperatives, different kinds of energy groups. We can connect them with economic development efforts. We can connect them with environmental remediation studies, and we can help them turn those liabilities into assets. And ideally, we will do that in a way where we can help you find ways to facilitate these collaborations. So at Michigan Tech, we're doing some things to help this. For example, we now have built a geospatial database of the abandoned mines in Michigan, Wisconsin, and Minnesota, on the southern shores of Lake Superior. And the databases from the different states are all in different conditions, different situations. None of them are adequate for energy planning. To help right now the engineers working for some CEO in a startup company or a major energy company to answer the question of what sites could we use to build energy storage assets, right? Not to mention geothermal energy, which is another example of this mature technologies that could be installed on site today. We are experimenting with the major barriers of collaboration, converting hand-drawn historic maps into 3D models, coming up with automated sequencing for both image processing just to improve the old maps, and then trying to build 3D models in an automated way. States like Pennsylvania have invested tens of millions of dollars in developing three-dimensional models of abandoned mines to model groundwater flow and environmental concerns and manage development. Potentially, we can help automate that process to speed it along in a more cost-effective way. We're developing autonomous or semi-autonomous, appropriately designed robotic surveyors that can go into flooded mines without having to drain them to actually look at the conditions under the mine and actually map out the three-dimensional spaces that are immediately visible and available, and sample for chemical contaminants, check for temperature and salinity and water flow and all those sorts of details that would be very useful, right? But much of this is just historic research that communities can do in their own archives. So I want to give you this quick example of our work from the Mather mine, where we realized there's so many choices you can choose from. You can't do this in theory. You've got to basically pick a mine and start work. So we got a group together and got a small grant from the Alfred P. Sloan Foundation some years ago. And we went to the community of Negaunee in Michigan, because Negaunee has served its power as a post-mining municipality with its own power infrastructure. They get power from WPPI Energy, a transmission cooperative, who are willing to share data with us. So we went to the city of Negaunee, and I said, oh, well, we're really interested in this project, and here's this historic mine I'm thinking about. And they, although this is the neighboring mine, and they said, oh, that's really great, but you don't want to go look at that mine. You should go look at this other mine. So the city staff, off the cuff, picked a mine site for us called the Mather mine. And the reason was that there had been a mining disaster in the mine I had identified as a heritage mine, and the bodies were still in that mine. They had never been recovered from those many years ago. And the mine was essentially a burial ground or a sacred site in the community. And the members of the municipality said, it's suicide to propose a study in this mine, even a hypothetical mine. No one's going to want you to do this. Go look at the Mather. So we started this process, and a lot of the records of the Mather are actually held at the neighboring town, Ishpeming. This is the mining museum in Ishpeming at the Cliffs Mining Museum. They hold a lot of these records. And between the state records and these records held, we were able to go through and begin reconstructing the technology systems used in the mine. We were able to start mapping the mine. The mine had been adaptively reused as part of the new high school after it had closed in the late 60s, early 70s. The city had moved their high school up and was adaptively reusing that landscape as part of the high school buildings and high school infrastructure. We started building this map for study, working around then with the historical organizations, the heritage organizations, the retired miners. We were able to then say, well, here are some hypothetical volumes that then we could look at the technology systems to say, within those volumes, which kinds of things make sense for a particular adaptation, right? And in this case, comparing them to Ludington, you can see there are different volumes of water or different head, the vertical drop that the water can be subjected to. There are different ways you could design it, and we could run those through different kinds of estimates to develop energy capacity. In this case, Ludington is essentially got an order of magnitude more water than could fit underground in the Mather, but it has an order of magnitude more head than the Ludington plant has, which means there's more than enough capacity potentially underground there for a wide range of options, from a large scale grid application balancing the generation of offshore wind turbines in Lake Superior to ship that energy down to the industrial regions in the southern part of the state, or to build a small scale industrial campus or data center where you're driving energy storage for green energy production just for an industrial campus. Any one of those scales of things could be built here if it made sense. They did all kinds of economic analysis and all sorts of stuff. And I want to talk about that because what matters for you is that what's become clear through this is that social acceptance of these projects, energy infrastructure projects. The single most important thing is early public involvement in design. And in this exercise, the design considerations, as we talked to the community organizations and had public meetings during COVID, by the way, so this was not normal. Don't take this as too representative of everything. But the community could express their concerns to us and we could feed those into the design early on before we spent $1.5 million on developing an infrastructure asset to 90% design plans that would then trigger oversight and consultation, right? So when the community talked to us about their concerns about surface water quality, their concerns about bat habitat, their concerns about reactivating the underground and recognizing the contributions of their ancestors in the states and national development of Michigan and the United States. The different kinds of things, articulating with the CTE program for technical education. Can you align with the electricity program for training line workers and for electricians? All of those things that came out were things that could be built into a community benefits plan at really very little to no cost for the company, right? And we were able to generate a design that had really substantial public support, rather than coming up with a design and then going to the public to ask them if they liked it, right? Okay, so that is going to allow me to stop with that sort of blistering review of all of this stuff and start having a conversation and dealing with some of your questions. And Brenda, depending on how you would like to do this, I could either just sort of read things from the chat and answer them, or you could ask me questions if you'd like.
If you're comfortable reading from the chat, that's fine.
Okay, that's great.
Thank you. I'm gonna turn my video off.
So I'll I may turn the slides back on then so I can go back and refer to them, and I will let's see, I'll start with the chat and, oh, those are all MHPN. Okay, so I'll go to the Q&A. So someone
Yeah,
asked if,
the Q&A, sorry.
yeah,
Yep.
someone asked if I want to get political. I happy to get political in private conversations, but as a member of the MHPN making a presentation, I just will say there's all kinds of news coverage for all of this. None of this is a surprise or a secret. But under the Infrastructure Investment Act and all the different things that came out of the Biden administration, there was a tremendous investment in storage among other energy technologies. And the Lewis Ridge project is the one project that was an energy storage project on abandoned mine land that survived all of those clawbacks and changes after the election as the Biden administration staff took over those agencies. And it has continued, although the Department of Energy closed its Office of Clean Energy Technology Demonstration Technologies, whatever that office was called. That's why the states have begun to step up their brownfields, trying to align their brownfields and energy development projects so that this is very, very clearly political. And you'll also see in the energy industry online in news stories that the uncertainty of the current environment is holding back investment. That this urgent investment, this $1.5 trillion that has to happen in 5 years, there's pressure in the pipeline, and the pressure continues to build and build and build. But the uncertainty is slowing down actual projects, investment in projects. Now that said, maybe some of the regulation changes are going to speed that up later. I don't know. But anyway, as all of this develops, there's certainly an effect. I know we had been supporting in industry, in private arrangements where we were supporting organizations that I'm not just can't discuss publicly, and in those support, many of them are on hold now. So everyone is sort of waiting to see what's going to happen. Janet Krieger asked about concerns about water tables being lowered, and this is a really great example of all of these things. In the materials you'll receive after the seminar, there are 2 projects that had proposed work in abandoned mines. It's not a new idea, right? We're not geniuses. This is a good idea, and people have had this idea in the past. There are 2 environmental impact studies. You can download and take a look at them and see how cultural resources and environmental resources align within those things. There is concern about water, but among them, one of the things I remind people is that environmental contamination in the abandoned mines, the historic abandoned mines, that environmental contamination is already there, and it's already the public's problem, right? It is not some private person's problem necessarily, although it varies a little bit. And so as we're thinking about citing these new investments in this new infrastructure and thinking about how infill could happen and pushing that infill to brownfields where we don't have to build new transmission lines through green corridors. We don't have to build big areas where we convert forest or farm into ponds which people can't recreate in, by the way, because they go up and down, right? Maybe one cost of that is that the risk of contaminated water with not just the historic contaminants from mining, but the PFAS chemicals too are a big concern. Maybe what our legislator could do is step up to say, you know what, if you build a facility that will clean the water in this abandoned mine, all the money that you spend on water treatment is a tax deduction from the infrastructure, because the infrastructure is going to do all kinds of other stuff anyway, even if it's not providing full tax revenue back to the community, right? It's going to help with grid stability, help with black start after a power outage. It's going to help with frequency regulation, all kinds of other stuff that it can do besides just arbitrage of buying low and selling high. It reduces transmission congestion. There's all kinds of things it does. If we decide as a society it's in the public interest to make this happen, we could create carrots that would pull development into these environments rather than leaving companies to look and say, I only want mines that have no environmental concerns at all, right? That's not that's an approach one can take. And what you end up with is people looking at the low-hanging fruit, where essentially they have two different open pit mines at different elevations. You'll see a lot of the examples on the spreadsheet are this strategy, just pumping water back and forth between those open pit mines. If we really want to take advantage of the opportunity, maybe we could create incentives to further drive that development. And that's something we can help with as professionals. Someone asked if there was an optimal match potential between historic cultural landscapes and AI data centers. Boy, oh boy. That is a really hot question. We were just debating this locally with I was talking to one of my county elected representatives from my county. And there's not a straightforward answer to this because it's not, right? But here's the thing that I was explaining. Every development is a trade-off choice, right? We have trade-off choices all the time. And where I live, we pay the highest electricity rates in the continental United States. UPCO, for consumers, is really terrible. If you were to gather the population together and just say, we're going to build a data center here that's going to suck water from either Lake Superior or from groundwater, and it's going to consume electricity off the grid, and it's going to drive up your electric rates even more, the opposition to that would be, people would not be on board with that plan, even if it creates 5 to 10 jobs over the long term after construction, right? In an area that desperately needs jobs. But take that same design and put it on an abandoned mine land where they're doing land reclamation and creating new green space mixed with green energy generation from something like solar fields, where there's an underground energy storage asset that's helping to support the grid stability and infrastructure, dealing with everything from blackouts to energy regulation, and potentially pumping a new generator source in to lower consumer prices, creating new underground environments that can be tourist habitat for a historic mine museum and bat habitat, where we can create new habitat that is potentially specifically designed to help bats fight white nose syndrome. Some other stuff you can add to that design at relatively little cost that can potentially be a tremendous asset, and people will look at it very differently. Again, you can't really have conversations about this hypothetically. You need to look at a specific example. Issues of toxic waste on mine sites. Yep, there are definitely all kinds of examples of that, but just be aware very broadly to separate the waste out in your mind. A lot of the toxic waste that is in public perception is leachate coming out of the tailings from the stamping and sort of reclamation mining. So these are things at the stamp mill sites on the water that are the most contaminated. Most mines are less contaminated, not contaminated, but less. Some mines more than others. The mine water can be contaminated either from the parent rock or from the mining process. That an example is one of these mines in our iron region. A bunch of those mines are contaminated with mercury. The mercury in the mines is not from the rock. It is from the mercury fulminate in the blasting caps of the dynamite used to make the mine, which means there's exactly X amount of mercury in that mine, which means that if I could build a project that would be a self-sustained energy storage system that'll pay for itself and also extract a little bit of mercury from that mine water every year as it operates, I could potentially permanently clean that mine of mercury and improve the groundwater in the local ecosystem. Why has no one done that? Because no one's tried to pencil it out and have it make sense. Because it is not the electric company's business to clean mercury out of the environment, and those who regulate mercury aren't in the electricity business. We need to create that connection to make them talk to each other. Didn't webs of mining tunnels weaken weight-bearing capacity for the above-ground construction? Yes and no. Again, it's complicated. As we were talking about all of this, our mine engineer on our design team was essentially so bored with what we were doing, he said, look, you guys come up with the design you want and then come check with me later. Because mining technology and underground construction, like we're really good at that, right? And much of the historic buildings around mines are built in a way where they are not on the void space, they are off the load space. And the shafts and access tunnels are often in a different rock from the load ore body underground. But it's complicated, right? It varies a lot the strength of the rock. Our rock here in the Keweenaws, this basalt rock and conglomerate rock, is really hard rock. It's really suitable for this kind of adaptive reuse. A limestone quarry, underground limestone quarry, would be great for this kind of use. So as you think about those, there will be some examples like coal mines, notoriously hard for underground work. Notoriously hard. Coal mines are just geologically very unstable. Could the Good Samaritan Law come into play? Yes, it could. And not only that, but our agencies could act to coordinate their efforts to show the roadmap to people, aligning the incentives, everything from the historic. We could create a new historic tax credit for adaptive reuse that is driven by a sensitive adaptive reuse of a historic industrial environment. You could line up all the existing tax credits and create targeted new ones to facilitate these projects, but that isn't even necessarily necessary. Existing credits are at times enough to make profitable operations in specific places. That's the optimal match question. Have you taught this concept to school children or how, or you have any specific techniques? I have talked with lots of different groups about this at many ages, and I actually used to teach kids a long time ago. In this case, there are all kinds of ways you could imagine doing this, from building models where you're moving water up and down or things like that, to building it digitally. Frankly, kids can do a lot of this. And by kids in this case, I mean like high school age kids. They can do 3D modeling, right? They know how to do that. And you could engage them with all these different groups. And if you start talking to science teachers and history teachers, they will come up with ways to do this. And what I would encourage you to do is download the Kettle report on the Mather Mine to look at the way in which we did these technical questions. And that would give some ideas. Some of it may be more complicated than what you're ready for, but that's okay. The other thing that you'll see in there is that that report focused mainly on the techno-economic aspects of the project. And since then, what we have been focusing on are questions of social acceptance. And the social acceptance is something that's really easy to work with, where you don't have to know calculus, right? You can do this, and you don't need to understand energy markets, which is a whole thing, right? But when you start talking to people about the way they value the things in their lives, people don't really value energy. What they value is hot showers and cold beer. What they value is low bills. What they value is the green space and the ability to go explore the ruins of the old mines. If you start talking about what do you value and what would you like to see, what we found in our studies is that people were willing to make concessions, things like wind turbines. They were willing to make concessions on areas like that if they understood the big picture of how is this all going to work together for my community. The current Section 106 process, the current NEPA process, does not invite people to think about it at that scale. Let's see, Dave Nelson. Hey, Dave Nelson, good to see you. You can also email Dave Nelson in Nagani and ask him questions. Have we had discussions with the EPA in regards to Good Sam Hard Rock bill and underground remediation? Could access Good Sam permit? Well, even if I were working on a permitting issue, I probably wouldn't be able to talk about it, right? But in that case, I have not had any conversations about anything. That One of the things that's always been curious to me is that, as an example, we've been doing this now since 2017 or 18, and it's no secret. And yet, even our regional mining companies have never called to say, can we talk about this idea? And I think, in all fairness, designing a mine closure project is so hard that they just don't want to touch it as an opportunity, right? As a development. Once they get a mine closure plan in place that is legally acceptable, they're just terrified to talk about it. And we have had a couple of discussions in the UP about energy storage or green energy generation on AML land. And I am hopeful that those will bear fruit, but I don't know. Mining in the UP, we're just getting underway. Projects would face insurmountable environmental review issues. Is current environmental policy sophisticated enough to allow for this kind of new use? That's an amazing question. And I want to go a little bit even further to say two areas. Number one, copper was identified now in the federal system as a critical mineral. And critical minerals are, there's going to be a tremendous push on critical minerals. And as part of that, not just new copper mining or nickel or iron mining, right? Copper being the critical mineral now. But also in reclamation mining, there's this big push to take new ways to use aqueous solution chemistry, aqueous reclamation to reclaim essential minerals and rare earths and things like that from critical minerals and rare earths from mine waste, for example, or from any post-industrial brownfield environment where there are contamination that could be harvested. And all of that is out there, and there's a whole ton of money flowing into that region, that area of research. And just as an example, I was at a workshop, a sort of a big discussion forum in Pennsylvania, invited by a coal mining environmental group, an environmental alliance, to talk about different aspects of this. And as I mentioned earlier, the way that we get siloed, where energy people think about energy, and mining people think about mining, and economic development people think about that, and recreation people think about recreation. Clearly, there's this need to get these groups together on this topic to talk about the multiple overlapping integrated ways this could work and how that affects the penciling out of the profitability, short and long term, and the sustainability of these projects. Just by way of an example, nobody has tried to pencil out a pumped storage, underground pumped hydro storage system for energy, hybridized with a geothermal district heating system, where you could pump this mine water, which 5,000 feet down underground here is at 95, 97 degrees Fahrenheit. If you're pumping that water up from this giant pool under there into a pond underground, but a pond up above, could you just harvest the geothermal energy out of that pond before you then discharge the used water and generate electricity then? Hybridize those, where essentially you're using the pumped hydro system to provide free warm water to the geothermal system. Nobody has tried to pencil that out yet, right? So as you think about all these kinds of things, this is the kind of thing where we as heritage assets, I'm not that old that I'm a heritage asset, we as heritage people can provide the interface to get these different groups talking about these things and working in collaborative ways with universities and colleges and school kids and retired engineers who think this is so cool, they want to help, right? You can actually get a lot of groundwork done, as we did at Mather, what we called a pre-feasibility study, where you suddenly can make people look at it very seriously, right? Is there mining development happening in the UP? For the last 2 to 3 years, or really maybe not the last year, but the last 2 to 3 years before that, I've been in the mine records a lot out in Gwyn at the DNR and Eagles repository there. And I can tell you there's a lot of stuff happening, lots of stuff. There's helicopter surveys and there's just a lot of stuff happening. So thank you very much for the compliment about my enthusiasm. And the last one here is, what do the tribes have to say about this kind of reuse? I can tell you, first of all, that I would not presume to speak on behalf of the tribes, right? Because that is not my role. But I will also then say, and not in a traditional but where I then talk on behalf of the tribes, but in my interactions with members of tribal TIPO offices or tribal environmental organizations through things like the Low Impact Hydropower Institute and the different kinds of committee services that I've been doing, we reach consensus a lot, and it's really the very basic bedrock. When members of the tribal government or the tribal agencies, they hear me say, why on earth would you go to a new mountain valley and convert that into a pond when we have this AML land over here that is already adversely impacted, and we could use that for the same purpose and basically the same dollar, right? They're on board with that approach. Plus, even more to the point, the kind of reclamation you can do on AML land as you're reclaiming these sites using things underground or hybridized above and underground, whatever the design might be. Oftentimes you can restore access to traditional cultural properties. You can restore habitat as part of the reclamation design. And in a way where you're working in this closed loop environment where you're no longer at the same level of risk for impacts with terrestrial environments. Many of the tribal representatives that I've interacted with have been very enthusiastic about the idea, right? The University of Washington asked me to do a presentation for the state level workshops that they were doing, thinking about energy storage problems and hydropower, just as an example. So as you think about all those kinds of things, there are risks. I don't want to minimize that. And I also want you to understand that this is a gold rush in the energy transition. It's a gold rush. And like any gold rush, the primary mining is happening of investors, not of resources, right? One of the things that has happened with I'm not going to name specific companies, but I've been talking to mine heritage organizations around the country, and on multiple occasions, I've run into the executive director of an organization that's a mine museum it's on a historic mine site, and they'll say, look, you're a really interesting and enthusiastic guy, but I don't want you to talk to my board members. And the reason is that the board members of these organizations get these slick pitches from solar energy companies that say, oh, we can take advantage of all these incentives and we can build a solar plant and provide revenue to your organization. All of these mining museums, of course, are desperate for income and they're looking for different ways to do that. And so they'll sign paperwork with these energy companies, often making investments of their very limited dollars in things like clearing vegetation or reinforcing historical structures in appropriate ways. And then some regulatory or economic change happens and that company disappears. And the mining museum or the historical organization has spent 3 years worth of their budget and they have absolutely nothing to show for it, right? So we are also in a position to be able to help those organizations craft their connection to these developments in a way that is wise for them, where we're able to help them and help them not be taken advantage of by quick talking business developers who are really, they can make a slick presentation on LinkedIn, but they also will evaporate 6 months later. As we've come to 2 o'clock and I've dealt with as many of the questions as I could as quickly as possible, I would like to let everybody know that we're gonna officially close the presentation, but I'm going to stay online. I've got time, right? My grades were turned in already. I'm happy to sit and chat more if people have additional questions. But thank you very much.
Yes, Tim, you are always, as always, an interesting an interesting guy, and you are a fantastic teacher and speaker, and I really appreciate you sharing this with us. I'm like mind blown. I feel like you've given us like opened up the door on a whole potentially better and a more prosperous future that acknowledges our past and makes use of these existing areas and improves them. Because man, Electric Mountain is gorgeous,
Yeah. Yeah.
absolutely beautiful.
They
So
actually, they used to take tours there, right? And they just recently
yeah,
closed it to tourism with COVID. They never reopened. But again, thousands of people, like 30,000 people a year, toured that underground power plant in the slate quarry, right? Um,
yeah. Yeah, and so obviously thank you, Tim, and thank you to all of the attendees. This is just a little wrap-up stuff. Y'all can hang around. I've got no place I need to be. This webinar is being recorded. I apologize if I didn't warn you ahead of time, but it is being recorded, and you will receive an email when the recording is available in the next few days. If you have any questions for the speaker or MHPN, please respond to that email. Our January webinar is yet to be announced. Please check our website for upcoming webinars and events. We do one of these the third Thursday of every month. And they're all of the other ones are, they're available in our library and on YouTube, I believe. And we wish you all great holidays, and we'll see you in the new year. Tim, anything else?
just to remind everyone that you'll get an MHPN email as a registrant that'll have a bunch of
Mhm.
resources. I'll convert my slides to PowerPoints, but really what you want are those environmental impact statements and the spreadsheets of
Oh,
companies and stuff like that. So
so we'll be sending out with that email. We'll be sending out the stuff I put in the chat too, because someone asked that. No, they're on their phone and they
yeah,
didn't have. Yeah,
and
great.
that has my contact info there, and I'm happy to connect with individuals to talk as well. So
Cool, cool. And so it sounds like I mean, are companies being formed, or people like you, or private companies? Who do you to do this sort of representation and do this sort of matchmaking
mhm.
bit? How and communities need to get together and do things, but someone needs to sort of lead the way. So
Yeah,
what
yeah.
does that site look like?
This is where I think as cultural heritage people, we are uniquely situated, right?
I agree.
Because if you think about the questions in communities about landscape and about development, um, um, and just as an example, one of the very basic strategies that I'm using now is to start with the community and laying out like how did your energy infrastructure evolve, right?
Hmm.
And who were the winners and who were the losers? How did it happen, like any infrastructure? And how has it changed over time? And then we talk about the opportunities, right? And as we do that, in the Mather case, which was just the most involved, we've been involved with the folks in Nagani for a decade almost working on this idea. What we found is that if you start from the perspective of the community, you have a very different approach than if you start as an energy company. The energy companies want to
Right.
know where are the golden apples, right? Query the database and tell me the 5 places I can do this most profitably, right? The communities, that's not their goal, right? And I
Right.
might add, you can imagine if you were the commander of a military base in DoD, looking at your energy security and infrastructure, and think, boy, an underground energy storage system that has the capacity to hold 1,000 megawatts or whatever, and make me resistant to terrorist attack or emergency response. That Defense Department person has a totally different perspective than the electrical company or the municipality,
Hmm.
right? It's all a question of figuring out what could be optimal and can we really make it work, right?
And I think um, there's a lot of imagination that needs to happen, because I say one of the biggest problems we're working with in bureaucracies, whether it's communities or
Yeah.
what organizations, is that there tends to be a lack of imagination.
This
And
is,
yeah,
Brenda, can I just say, you would have been amazed that when the energy people have no idea about mining, and the mining people have no
yeah,
idea about energy, right? So when I showed those data plots of the expected power potential from the Mather to the energy companies, they're like, right, the jaws hit the table. That if you would
yes,
think about the Mather mine as a power plant built that way, it would be
right,
the fifth or sixth largest hydropower plant on the planet.
And you don't have to mine any lithium for those batteries,
right? Well,
right?
this is one of those trade-offs too, right? Because
Right.
if you're building a warehouse of batteries, we're going to need lithium mines, and it's going to open up all this other adverse impact. And in
Yeah.
traditional compliance work, they're not allowed to compare the costs of projects that won't happen when they're looking at the benefits of a project. But you know who does do that? People, right?
Yeah.
People. So
Yeah.
that's a big deal.
Cool. Very cool. Anybody else out there? Are you still there? Send us some more questions. Otherwise, Tim and I will just
Like
keep
there's
chatting and
still 27 people there.
okay.
Um, I would recommend playing around a little bit on the spreadsheet and looking at the companies because there really are these evolving technical platforms, some of which are very mature, like pumped hydro, high density pumped hydro, compressed air, advanced compressed air, and even some of the gravity systems are pretty mature. And then some are totally sketching, they're hypothetical. But most of them could be installed in ways that just nobody's thought about it. And like geothermal is a great example where geothermal heat pumps, generally speaking, are now so efficient that they are market competitive in many places, not where I live because the cost of consumer electricity. But when you put that into mine water heat pumps rather than air or ground capture heat pumps, transfer heat pumps, they're even more potentially useful. And we at Michigan Tech are one of the few places in the world that has had an operating demonstration project on mine water heat pumps for years now. And there are experiments in that whole set of technologies in Germany, they're using, for instance, direct solar energy to heat water pipes and pump the coal mine water up and heat it up all summer and pump it back into the mine to warm the coal mine up and then take that heat back out during the winter time, right? And just the way these technologies have evolved is amazing. And so I would encourage people just to play around with it because you know your region, you know the people who live there and the kinds of histories. In our work, we've focused on metal mines because obviously this is where we live. But surface and underground quarries and salt mines and all these different resources that are out there, including coal mines. I see Renee just dropped a comment in. There are all kinds of projects with coal mines happening around the world. These high density storage systems, for example, if you're already going to pump the water back and forth between concrete tanks or big steel tanks, just put the big steel tanks under the ground in the coal mine and you can do them there, right? They have structural stability that an open cavern does not.
So yeah, as one person wrote as part of their questions, like why are we building these things in open fields in Saline and whatever when
Right.
we could be building them in Detroit or places where there are abandoned mines where the environment has already been degraded. And I concur.
Yep. That among the many, many benefits of pushing this kind of infill is that besides all the green space benefit, you can often adaptively reuse these underground environments in multiple ways, right? There's a great project in Finland that is one of these. I don't know. They call it the Future Mine experiment at Kallio. It's an effort to build a restaurant and some nightclubs, and they're going to also have geothermal heat exchangers and pumped hydro energy storage, and they're putting all this stuff underground to have this underground complex in one of the largest iron mines in Europe. And it's a great idea, but it's just not typical, right? But at the same time, that creative thinking this is the moment where we get to think creatively and ideally come up with solutions, not only that are sustainable, good sustainable solutions financially wise, but also that redress past imbalances, right? Where we can fix
Exactly, yes.
things while we're
Fix things.
doing this, right? And it will last then for 100 years to our children and their children and their children, right?
And putting just a discotheque and a bar in a coal mine or an unused mine, is certainly one way to bring attention because that's what the headlines are going to be, right?
Yep.
You know, the whole like, no, we're using mines, blah, blah, blah. But like, oh, disco in the dark or something, you know, whatever.
Just like there's another allied technology in geothermal that is using old fracked gas wells where they're actually experimenting with pumping water into the down one well, letting it trickle through the void spaces that have been created and then come up another well heated for use in geothermal. And the idea is that this
Ah,
system is a way to capture thermal energy that could be used either for electricity generation or for direct HVAC stuff, right?
right.
And the idea is that we can take all these fracking well workers who are now unemployed and we can put them to work in the energy field using the same technology systems in ways that will allow for water treatment and efficient sustainable energy use, right?
I thought fracking was the future. You mean they're all unemployed now?
That um, um,
Sorry.
the whole idea of our underground technologies for boring and drilling, again, they're light years ahead of when people started thinking about this stuff years ago. So now these constructions that you'll see on the website and other places where you have the two different mines, Kidston just did a story about this. They had boring operations where they were connecting underground these two pits at different elevations and building the pump house and things underground. And they just broke through to make this connection for the head race and the tail race between the two ponds. And that kind of underground construction is light years ahead of where it was 25 years ago, right?
Yeah.
So the idea of even what's happened is that those costs are dropping down and down and down. If you get into like the details of CapEx and all that sort of stuff and the recovery, all of these technologies have evolved in a way where, like we found at Mather, in certain scenarios in the Mather demo, it could work and make money as is with no other
Hmm.
changes. The primary reason being that your land acquisition costs in that study, the city of Nagani, we would be articulating with their municipal power systems. It's owned by the city. The municipal
Oh,
government in Nagani said, we'll
yeah.
sell you a 99-year lease for $1, right? So land acquisition went to zero, basically. And that opened up all kinds of other potential for investment, right?
Right. And when you get the community involved, you can do things like that.
You could
Cool.
imagine the faces of people when we talked about the idea of mercury abatement, for example. Now, Mather didn't have a mercury problem for that particular study that we had done so far, but some of these other iron mines do. And the idea of being able to instead describe it as it's a water treatment system that pays for
Hmm.
itself by storing energy, right?
Yes, I think
Yeah.
a lot of people are going to need to have that sort of analogy flipped, right?
Yep.
Look at it from the other way. It makes a lot of sense. And I didn't realize that the mercury was actually from the blasting caps. I just thought it was like
In,
in the
in
native rock.
Yeah, during a period of time, that's true. There
Hmm.
are also mines where it's in the native rock, but
Oh, okay.
um, just as
I'm
an
not a
example, one of
geologist.
my favorite illustrations of this when I'm talking to people is in the mountains above Silicon Valley. Right there were mercury mines, and they're horribly contaminated now, and it's all in a park and wilderness area above Silicon Valley where everyone likes to go hike and things like that, and the groundwater is terribly, terribly contaminated. Right. Well, okay, Silicon Valley. Well, what if you were our demonstration project, right? And you built a water treatment system that also stored energy and maybe did geothermal, right? Whatever it is. Um, um, it's just the potential is just so tremendous. 100 years from now, the technology for water treatment is going to be it's a whole nother deal, right? So if
Yeah.
we can manage to manipulate the environment productively for this next century, our long-term descendants will hopefully be looking at totally different solutions to that problem.
That's the other thing I see is that this is definitely seems like a sustainable thing, right?
Mhm.
If you could do this for a long, long time and, not with the environmental impacts and hazards of coal
Yep.
burning or even natural gas burning power plants, right? Cool. Anything else?
Well, as people are just thinking about this, if you want to talk about this, this is the kind of thing that as we're training students to become young professionals and head out into the world of preservation and compliance work and things like that. You can imagine I've found this kind of terrifying because the work I'm talking about here is not traditional, right? And so to tell a young person, oh yeah, you could build a career doing this, is really true. There's desperate need for what I've been talking about, but also like not like normal, not normal. And so there's a risk there. And so as company owners who are out there who are members of the Michigan Historic Preservation Network or participants in this system, you can see how hiring people who have expertise in landscape and expertise in communities, who can do ethnography and oral history, who can do survey research, people who can do the historical and archaeological research surrounding infrastructure and extraction. You could look at adaptive reuse as a driver potentially to attract development. And
Mm-hmm.
in Negaunee, as an example, we had that situation where there was a municipal power system. Because of tax forfeiture, the mine had reverted ownership to the town. So the town owned the mine and the land. Their high school was built on the land, and the power system was all municipal and connected to a cooperative. A for-profit company will have different interests, but yet the same is true of tribal governments. Sometimes there are tribal energy companies versus sometimes they're participants in nonprofits. And I think, in my experience, our legislators need help to understand this big picture because they know all of this investment is needed, and they know from their communities that energy expenses are of great concern. They also know that green space is important, but their knee-jerk reaction is to say permitting causes the problem. But in reality, what I'm talking about is if you can build the project in such a way that you are in compliance with all the steps you would need to do for NEPA or NHPA, from the inception and design process, you've included all the stakeholders going through, and obviously it's not everything or everybody, but if we can find a way so that they get expedited reviews on the end, so the companies see that as something they can rely on. But independent of that, the cooperatives have a different business model than the companies, and they see the participatory value and the total project value rather than the profitability or the cost as being a more important metric. It's a chance to explain to our legislators how a harmonious design with an appropriate technology where we create incentives to attract the correct investors and empower the marketplace to do the things it needs to do. Like, we need our leaders to step into that space, and we need to help them. Because otherwise they're going to point at us and say, we're the problem with energy infrastructure not being built, right?
Oh, yes. I mean, they've already, I mean, I won't get political, but the whole Section 106 review has been
Yep.
stripped for energy projects and transportation projects. Yeah, last I heard. So,
Yeah.
okay, great. Well, I'm jealous of your students. So I would love to have had you as a professor. So, oh,
Well, we'll see. I just turned in grades, right? So, um, no,
okay.
I'm very fortunate, and I'll throw out a plug for all the companies to sign up for the Michigan Tech and ACRA partnership virtual career fair that'll be coming up in March. We'll
Oh,
be
excellent.
circulating information through MHPN. They've been supporters of this process over the years. Last year, we created a virtual career fair for students in cultural resources, starting with a very focused example. We had 50 different universities join the event, and almost 30 or so employers, from major employers like Caltrans to sole operator companies and not-for-profit institutions. all of that to build a virtual venue where people can hire from all the small programs around the country, because there's so many underrepresented communities that can't necessarily attend the major meetings, can't use those networks that are the major networks for getting jobs, getting their name out.
Mhm.
So please keep an eye out and join us in the career fair. Maybe you will find someone who's got an industrial heritage and archaeology degree or a sustainability degree, somebody who is attractive to you and your company to think about cultivating these kinds of projects.
Excellent. Yes. Very good. Thank you so very much. And thank you all for joining us and for hanging out for a little bit. We really appreciate it. Have a good
Bye,
day. Bye
everybody.
bye.